Raman, great to see you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here.
So I got to say a couple things before we really get going. In many respects, I think this is going to be one of the most challenging interviews that I've done. And that's number one, because the concept that we're talking about, right, emotional intelligence, it's broad, it's nuanced, it's misinterpreted, it's looked at as theory to some people, and they don't quite know what to do with it. So I think the whole topic's going to be interesting, but also this is challenging because I view you as one of the most pivotal people in my kind of career journey. And I just hope that I can, honor our relationship with this conversation today.
Well, thanks, Mike. That's an awfully big compliment to start. So I gotta use my emotional intelligence to put that aside. Thank you.
Excellent. So I want to kind of begin with the end in mind, as you talk about a lot. So our audience, everybody listening to this, is trying to become better at what they do, trying to become better human beings, trying to have better relationships, and just live a fulfilling life, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of first. And then the second part of that is the topic that I really talk about all the time. I haven't had language for this, but it's this idea that, like, integrating work and career, right? Like, I think that is so fundamental right now, and we've never been at a better time to actually do that. And I think listening to some of your work, you kind of have language for that where I didn't. You talk a lot about bringing yourself to what you do, or integrating these two things. So if people are going to, want to get better, and emotional intelligence is maybe a path to get there, can you just start by kind of describing what you do at the Junto Institute, and like your journey to sort of discovering emotional intelligence as like a window into actualizing what you do?
Yeah. It's a long story, so I'll summarize it. I stumbled across emotional intelligence in my modern form fairly accidentally and serendipitously. I was studying leadership for my own benefit professionally, and kept coming across that phrase. And although I was aware of it, I hadn't studied it, didn't know much about it. I dove into it. This is about, I don't know, it's been about 13 or 14 years now. And the more I went down that rabbit hole, the more I discovered how beautiful the surroundings were. And studying it started to answer a lot of questions that I had about myself and about my past and about my relationships, and most importantly, about the person I wanted to become. And a big part of that was this idea of bringing who I am to what I do, which is something I've always strived to do. And at times that was troublesome because, especially in the corporate world, that's not normal. And in fact, in the corporate world, we're to some degree expected to conform to how everyone else is, like the norms of the organization. And I struggled with that mightily during that period of my career. So the more I studied emotional intelligence, the more I practiced it, the more I felt comfortable being who I was in every aspect of my life. And that then influenced the founding of the Junto Institute, where part of what we do is help companies and their teams become infinitely better, smarter, and healthier through not just learning emotional intelligence, but the most important part of it, which is practicing emotional intelligence. And even people who haven't studied it, we have found through our experience and our observation that just practicing it without knowing what it is actually makes a difference.
So you kind of started out on this, I guess it would be traditional leadership journey. What is leadership? And really you sort of discovered the key is emotional intelligence, and that there's also all of these downstream benefits, if you will, that it's not just, it's essentially the key to integrating what I would describe as like a successful, happy, healthy life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one thing that gets overlooked when it comes to leadership is we talk about leadership in the context of other people, organizations, businesses. We don't talk enough about leadership in the context of ourselves. Before we can lead others, we must be capable of leading ourselves. And that's where emotional intelligence plays a dual role.
Okay. What was the light bulb moment where you really felt, okay, this is the key? I have a quote here that I think one of your companies said, what somebody from one of your companies said, not only did Junto make me a better CEO, it made me a better hockey player, better husband, a better father. Was that the light bulb moment?
It was around that time. It was around that time because it was one thing for me to feel like I was getting better and that things were changing for my own self. It was another to see that happening with other people. And it wasn't just that one person. That quote was uttered at an event where others, some of his peers, were saying similar things. And so that was when it was like, okay, there's something here.
Can you talk a little bit about how you personally started implementing EI or researching it? Like what resources did you turn to, in those early days when you were just doing that for yourself?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was the book Emotional Intelligence. That's the title of it, by Daniel Goleman, Goleman. And he's widely considered to be the forefather of what we now consider to be emotional intelligence. He didn't, create it or invent it. He kind of based it on the work of social scientists who came before him. So that's the book that to this day, I still recommend. It has a lot of the science in it, which I think is really important. Emotional intelligence, as you said earlier, has become a little misunderstood, and a lot of people have taken the liberty to change the definition or morph it. It is still a scientific, science-based practice and body of knowledge that is really important to lean on in all aspects of life, but the purity of it comes from the work that Goleman and his peers have done.
So when you say it's rooted in science, what do you really mean by that? I mean, are you talking specifically about the studies that he has brought to light in kind of psychology, or are there other aspects of this that have been really scientifically studied?
Yeah, good question. So it started in psychology and has since been, emotional intelligence has been continued through neuroscience, especially, and some sociology. I'm not an expert in any one of those areas. I've tried to bring it to the business world. But I think the biggest one is the neuroscience part, that in the last 15 years or so, brain imaging technology has given these neuroscientists literally a window into how our brains operate. And that has been able to explain so much of the physiology of emotional intelligence that we can start putting two and two together, about why the psychological background of emotional intelligence aligns with the physical.
Okay. So we've been throwing around the term emotional intelligence. How do you actually define that?
Yeah. We define it as our ability to recognize and regulate the emotions in ourselves and in others, our ability to identify and label those emotions with specific words. And then the most important part of the definition is our ability to use all of that information to guide our actions, thinking, language, and behavior.
And so why is that important? I can see some people listening to this and saying, okay, great, but like, yeah, how does that get enacted, I guess? Can you give an example maybe?
Sure. The easiest example is when we are troubled by something or when we are stressed by something. And this past year and a half is probably the best example. We've all been thrown all kinds of curves in the environments in which we live and work. Some of them have been our own doing, but the vast majority have been circumstances beyond our control. Our ability to manage that is based on our ability to practice emotionally intelligent skills and behaviors. So for instance, in our framework that we use, there are 16 building blocks. And one of them is adaptability and resilience, which happens to be a part of the self-management level. And that's something that a lot of people talk about, and it's a part of a lot of popular philosophical beliefs. Probably the most resonant one is Stoicism. But what a lot of these philosophies leave out is the other elements. So my point being that it's one thing for me to be adaptable and resilient. It's another thing then for me to pick up on the cues that I'm getting from the people around me, both in my home and in my workplace. And in today's world, even through video technology. So I spend, for instance, just as much attention when I'm in a meeting or a session for my work. I pay just as much attention to other people as I do to myself in the moment. And if I'm exercising my ability to be resilient, for instance, I have to pay attention to how other people are reacting in the moment, because I might think of myself as being in a strong position, and I might then all of a sudden try to influence other people. But if they're not in a place where they can be or want to be influenced, I'm going to fall flat on my face. And so it's, in other words, emotional intelligence isn't just about ourselves. It's really about the world in which we are operating on a daily basis.
Personally, I find this at least it's most resonant with me in sort of the coaching type environment. So if I'm in a relationship with an employee or my kids, or in a mentor type relationship, that's where it sort of clicked for me. It's like, I have to understand where my influence sits in this relationship, and the words that I'm using, like how they're landing on somebody else, and also how everything else I'm doing is landing on somebody else. And then I need to be able to step into that person's shoes if I want to get the best out of them. Like, that's what a coach is there for. So you talk a lot about mentorships. And again, I think one of the biggest things I learned from just kind of following you and your work is the idea that mentors don't really tell you what to do. They ask really good questions. Can you talk a little bit about like the roots of that in particular? Because I think that was probably the number one lesson, and probably the biggest value unlocker in my personal life that I've taken away from this.
Yeah. Well, the roots of it is both experience and then also some studying and research. When I was probably midway through my career, was reflecting on the most high impact people in my life, and I was trying to figure out what were some of the commonalities amongst them. And it turned out that the biggest one was they asked questions. And it wasn't that they asked good questions or they asked the right questions. They just asked a lot of questions. Because in my view, mentorship, and this is the research and the studying that I did, is really about discovery. And the only way for me, if I'm being mentored, the only way for me to discover more about myself and where I want to go is for people to bring out from what's inside with questions that I'm probably not going to ask myself. And so that's where that came from. And the more that I then started to do that myself in my mentorship roles, where I was mentoring others, I saw that impact occurring. And then since that time, we put it into practice at Junto, and we kept hearing the same types of feedback. And so people started to shift, that they started to appreciate the idea that mentorship isn't about giving advice and guidance. That's to some degree coaching and consulting and advising. Mentorship is its own little place. And it's about encouraging people to discover who they are and where they're going. And the best way to do that is through questioning.
Yeah, and as the mentor, there's the self-aware aspect of recognizing that if I'm the mentor and you're the mentee, I don't stand in your shoes. Like, no matter how many facts we throw out on the table, you are interpreting certain things differently, and I need to see that and respect that. And the best way that I can possibly respect that is by asking great questions that get you to think about it from a different lens.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay, so I want to get a little, we kind of covered a little bit of the benefits, or at least given people some taste of that. I want to drill down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned kind of the building blocks of your framework that you have at Junto. And I don't know if this is exactly the same, but like, can you sort of break down for us like what you would view as the components of emotional intelligence? Like, I know empathy is kind of a big thing in there. Well, how do you break all of that apart?
Yeah. So back to Daniel Goleman's work, he had conceived of what he called 4 domains of emotional intelligence, which are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. After the first 5 years of our work, what we heard was this consistent feedback that there seemed to be, dare I say, an order to it. And therefore, what we ended up conceiving was this framework called the building blocks, where we take those 4 domains and turn them into levels. Foundation is self-awareness, upon which sits self-management. And those 2 levels then compose what we call self-mastery. And before we can then move on to social awareness, which is level 3, and relationship management, we must build stronger competencies and abilities with self-mastery, because the levels 3 and 4 now involve other people. And so I might walk into a room thinking that I can just automatically read the room, when in fact, unless I know where I am in the moment, and unless I can turn the switch where now I'm making it about them and not about me, I'm not going to be able to read the room as effectively. And then the 4th level is relationship management, which is the most advanced one, the most complex one, which is where everybody wants to be, not recognizing that it's the first 3 levels they need to start with.
Okay, so let's stick with kind of this self-mastery one for the moment, because again, I think most of our audience is probably in that bucket. We're people who are looking to get a new job, looking to make a different jump in our career or kickstart our career. We may not be in the ranks of managing big teams, so let's kind of stick there. What would the process be like for an individual to start exploring getting better at emotional intelligence, getting more self-aware?
Yeah. Well, and you just uttered it. It starts with the foundation level, which is self-awareness. And back to what I said about our building blocks framework. So each of the 4 levels then has 4 separate building blocks, as we call them. For self-awareness, they are emotional awareness, self-image, clarity on purpose and values, and self-confidence. And so emotional awareness is what we call the cornerstone of the entire framework. And that's where we use this tool called the emotion wheel as a method for us to check in with ourselves and to label how we're feeling in any given moment. And it can be a mix of words that come off of that wheel. And there are other tools that can also be used in that regard. But it's not just me knowing how I feel, it's also understanding why I feel that. And it's also understanding what type of an impact that's going to have on other people. So that's all part of emotional awareness. So that's where we typically will start. And then each of the 3 corresponding blocks in self-awareness help build overall our ability to then rise up to the level of self-management.
Okay, so I'm up on the screen for people who are watching this, watching the video of this. I have the Junto Institute's emotion wheel up. I have one in front of me. Raman, take me through like how you would use this with somebody starting out.
Yeah, with somebody starting out, what we say is, first of all, using the language "I'm feeling."
Okay.
So taking ownership of it, not I am, but I'm feeling. And that's at the center of the wheel. Then the 6 emotions at the core are the 6 primary human emotions. And we encourage people to start there. Okay, are you feeling positive? Are you feeling negative? Are you feeling love, joy, and surprise? Or are you feeling fear, anger, or sadness? And then from there, branching out to find more nuanced words that better describe how you are feeling in the moment. So an example is that this past year and a half, for instance, a lot of people have been using the word anxious or anxiety. And that's, is that coming from a place of fear, or is it coming from a place of anger? Is it coming from a place of sadness? Because anxiety, while it only sits in one place on our wheel, can apply in all 3 of those areas. But there have been a lot of people who've been afraid this past year and a half. There are a lot of people who've been sad this past year and a half, and so on. But those words can sometimes incorporate, as you can see, so many different nuanced emotions that it's important for us to find a specific one that resonates with us personally. And the other point I want to make is what I referred earlier is we can sit in any one of those parts of the wheel and simultaneously. So I can feel dismay and frustrated and hostile while at the same time feeling ecstatic, sentimental, and love. And that demonstrates kind of the complexity of our humanity.
Okay, so I want you to do this with me, but I want to just, again, I want to keep reminding people, like, I want to connect this back to the why, right? Like, again, okay, yeah, it sounds like a therapy session, right? Like I'm getting in touch with my feelings. Why am I doing that? Right.
Mhm.
So, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'll just try to summarize. So for an individual, practicing this on a daily basis or in a situational basis, like a situational basis, will help you understand more about how you're feeling in certain moments, and then be able to, and those are being, that's being projected out, right? And so you're better able to understand how somebody else may be interpreting you. Am I missing anything there?
Well, I think one thing that we haven't touched on yet is that when I have a sense of how I am in a moment, I now am in position to exercise self-control.
Okay.
And so back to the, what has happened this past year and a half, and I didn't get granular enough, so I'll get granular now in a different context. That could be a face-to-face interaction with someone, and someone says something that triggers me. And it could be anything, right? But it triggers me. We all have our own triggers. I can either react or I can respond. I typically react when I am not checking in with myself to see how it is I'm feeling. And the reason is our emotions work faster than our thoughts do. Our emotions are automatic system one responses by our brain, where our thinking is slower system two process of our brain. If I know that what somebody just said triggered me and I'm feeling hostile or defensive or afraid, now I can create this distance between the stimulus and the reaction. And that distance is the space. And in that space, I have the ability to choose my response. And that could be a breath, that could be a sip of water, that could be me walking away, that could be me counting to 10. And that's one of those building blocks now in self-management of emotional balance, where in the moment, in an instant, I can effectively achieve greater balance by stopping because I'm checked in with myself of how it was and I'm feeling in the moment, as opposed to simply reacting and flipping my lid.
Okay. So that makes a lot of sense to me, because obviously a plague in in our society right now is this instant reaction, instant gratification, instant reaction, bings, beeps. I have to react all the time, and just giving that pause. And this is, I mean, it's a very similar principle with, mindfulness, meditation, just taking some time to like feel your fingerprints or whatever, to give, it's really just about that separation.
Right.
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 Okay. So that's an excellent synopsis for why individual should do it. Do you use this in a group setting as well? Is that for transparency, for literally getting out, like in verbal form, how somebody is feeling to their team members, or how does that dynamic work?
Yeah. So, for instance, on our team huddles every week, we start with the emotion wheel check in. How are we feeling? And then you have the option to say why. If someone doesn't feel comfortable, they don't have to. What that does now is, so if I'm on a Zoom call or in a meeting with 6 people and I hear how they're feeling and why, I'm now in better position to know how to manage the relationship with not just each of them, but the group as a whole. Right? If our company just went through a tough period, people might be feeling fear, anger, or sadness. If I'm a leader, I have to be really careful now about how I tread when I hear the words that they're sharing. On the flip side, I know I can be a little bit more playful, positive, forward-looking if I hear the opposite.
So is this connected to the term that I hear a lot, which is psychological safety?
I believe that when we create an environment where people are allowed to share how they're feeling without it going too far and for too long, that means that we are contributing to psychological safety.
Right, because I've definitely seen the speak on this and then have it go wrong in
Yeah.
teams, right? And it feels to me like this would be a really good tool to getting those things out on the table and building a practice around it,
Right.
for people. Okay, so take me through this. Have me do this. So I would start with I'm feeling. Is that correct?
Mhm. Yeah.
And do I go to the next I'm feeling one of these six, or do I go straight up to
However you feel like, because you've seen the wheel before, you can go
right?
wherever you want. right? But let's assume that you haven't seen it before. This is the first time.
Yeah. Okay.
So I would ask you, hey, Mike, what are you feeling right now?
Okay. So I'm feeling joy. I'm excited about this conversation. I'm excited for just the topic and what we're diving into. Um, I I have some fear because I'm a little insecure around being on camera and having these conversations kind of like in a public forum. I'm definitely a behind the scenes guy, and I've been trying to work on that, but
Mhm.
I definitely feel that. And then there was one here as I looked at this that I was surprised where it was. So, oh, here it is. So, um, we have I went straight to the term nostalgic, okay,
Mhm.
because of our relationship. But it's funny, I wouldn't put it in kind of love and joy. It actually makes me a little bit sad.
Hmm.
Just because like you and I have this connection that went way back, and I'm reliving some of those, and I don't necessarily get to do that on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of like sadness attached
Mhm.
to the nostalgia, I guess, which is kind of interesting based
Right.
on where this all was. So that's how I would say it.
Good. And the whole idea here is there's no right or wrong. So you just attached nostalgic or sentimental to a
Right.
feeling of sadness, and that's your way of processing it. And the beauty of sharing this with other people is it can't be argued with. We've done this thousands of times, Mike. I have not once ever heard someone try to rebut someone else's emotion. Right. So that's a really powerful thing to say. And back to this idea of psychological safety, the more we do that, the more psychologically safe people feel. And then especially when we're in an environment where if a leader, for instance, let's say that we're on a team and you're a leader on the team, and you just said, I feel insecure and I feel sadness. Like imagine how I feel if I'm like an entry level team member or an associate or I report to you. And I've just heard that. Now I feel so much more comfortable. I might not want to do it just yet, but I now feel more comfortable doing it at some point in time because you've role modeled the behavior. And that's a really critical piece to this when we're with other people is that's how we get other people to become more emotionally intelligent is by role modeling the behavior. We have a team member right now, quick anecdote, who's been
Yeah.
with us about 15 months. She hasn't been through any of our program. She's a freelancer. And I have already observed that just by virtue of the way that we operate as a business interpersonally, she has become more emotionally intelligent 15 months without studying it and practicing it as intentionally as all of our members do. Like it's staggering. And I just started picking that up a couple of weeks ago. I literally said to myself during a meeting, she's different today than she was a year ago. That's really cool. But it's because everybody else in our team is doing their best to role model the behaviors.
Right. So it's probably, I mean, it's somewhat of a difficult thing to adopt because it is a practice, and you have to have buy-in, and you have to have people modeling this type of behavior. So let's say you get through a lot of that. I mean, what are the outcomes? I mean, we know that we have better relationships, and I'm talking specifically like in a business setting, I guess.
Mhm.
Maybe we have better relationships, we have more trust. um, what about at an individual level? What do people who take this on and go through this journey,
Mhm.
what's the number one thing that they say they come out of it with?
I don't know if there's one thing necessarily, but if I had to answer that, I would say that they're just more comfortable with who they are. We hear words like clarity and confidence a lot, and not confidence in a boastful or positive way, because confidence, by the way, from a scientific standpoint, actually includes an awareness of what we're not good at and what our limitations are. So I think those are some of the things that we get for ourselves. Uh, I at a very anecdotal level, I hear people talking about like they just sleep better. They feel more comfortable in their own skin. They're more comfortable finally being who they really are in front of people with whom they weren't in the past. And that could be personal relationships or professional relationships. So those are a lot of the factors. And that's why it also contributes to what we started with, which is bringing who you are to what you do.
So I would say, I just want to give the audience a little bit of like what I've found in myself, since we're talking about benefits. And I haven't gone through exactly through your program. Everything I've learned, I've just kind of absorbed from following you and watching what you do. But I would say confidence is a big one. And I think it's confidence, not only necessarily like in how I carry myself, but being okay with what I know, what I don't know. I think there was a lot of like imposter syndrome at certain times in my life, or places where I felt like I had to be the expert. I had to know that thing and I didn't. And there was a lot of anxiety around that. And for whatever reason, just being able to sit with that or understand how I was feeling about that led me to just say, okay, and be okay with that. And then go down a path to kind of work through the rest of it. So I definitely feel like I am more comfortable in knowing my core, but then also like I feel more comfortable in taking on things that are outside of my core if I
Mhm.
choose to. Because I no longer kind of view those as, oh, I should know that. It's like, oh, I get to try that, or I get to, I get to do these things. And I don't view myself as like, oh, I should have already known that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So that's like how I think I have in using the wheel, in again following some of your practices. That's like what I've observed in myself. And I would also say and this has just been really interesting. I think like a huge accelerant to my journey with this has been having kids, because like kids are a little bit easier to read, and it's very clear to me that the way you solve a problem with a child is by managing their emotion. It's not their behavior, it's not what they did,
Right.
but it's how they feel. And you can totally take them down the wheel. And if they're acting out, you can by asking some good questions. Again, like going back to mentorship, coaching, like it all comes to me through the kids. And so I think I've become much more self-aware. I still have a long way to go, as I think we all
Mhm.
do. But I don't know. I guess like if you want to become more emotional intelligent, go have a few kids. As mine would
Yeah.
say, life hack, Dad, life hack.
Yeah. A really big life hack. Yeah. To that point, there are no hacks with emotional intelligence, because it is, as you referred to, a journey. It's a lifelong practice. I'll speak to a couple things. Number one, I talk a lot about how my two daughters were the accelerant for me. That I would have become more emotionally intelligent just with them,
Mhm.
but because I was studying it while they were growing up, my gosh, like I had the blessing of those two things simultaneously. So without a doubt, and here's one of the reasons why. Another one of the building blocks in self-awareness is self-image, as I mentioned earlier. Our self-image isn't just what we think of people, just what we think of ourselves. In other words, our opinions and biases, but also it's informed by all the feedback we get from other people, and whether we take self-assessments and so forth, right? So all this information that we derive from external parties. Children are constantly giving us feedback when we're parents, whether we know it or not. Everything that they do and say, everything is feedback to us. And by the way, most of it is feedback about us. And yet we don't treat it as that. And then once that light switch goes on, we recognize that data is giving us information about ourselves. And that helps us then manage that relationship, as you said, because we're moving up the levels. Right? I'm observing how they are, social awareness. I'm controlling myself. I'm informing my self-awareness. And now my relationship management capabilities as a parent have become stronger as a result. And the challenge as adults is we don't get enough feedback, right? Especially in the workplace. And so we've got to find ways, invent ways to do that. And that's why even something like the emotion wheel can be helpful, because it forces us to articulate how we're feeling, which is feedback for ourselves. And when somebody says how they're feeling because it's based on something we said or did, that's also feedback to ourselves. That's why it can be really powerful to have children, because they give us that feedback, but as adults, we've got to find other avenues for it.
Yeah, feedback is super key. I agree, we don't get enough of it. And so practices like this are great. To bring, and I think I wanted to just make another point. I think about when I hear people say they're more confident because of this, it ties beautifully back to, bringing yourself to what you do, because you're here sharing some of the most intimate feelings that you have with other people, and you realize that, oh my God, the world's not going to end. Oh my God, these people aren't going to hate me. They when you have the nurturing, when you set the tone for this, it lifts everybody up. And so now we're full circle to, wow, I'm comfortable doing what I do. I'm comfortable now taking more risks and being out there. And that translates to more creative companies. I've seen it in myself for sure, in our company and what we want to do and the things that we go after. So I just love that. And I think, again, it's somewhat tough sometimes for some people to see these sort of, maybe see the power of some of these intangible benefits and how you tie all of it together. But I think that's the case. When you have more confident people and they're willing to take more risks and have the safety and have the team support behind them, like, you're going to go farther. And that's including all of your other relationships as well. So to the person that, like, is kind of stuck in a large corporation and listening to this and saying, like, there's no effing way that I can, bring myself to what I do, like, what would you say to that person?
I would say that you may not be able to bring your entire self to what you do, but you can probably bring more of yourself. And that alone is a victory, because that's what life is all about, is getting better every single day. And so if we can do that, just bringing more of who we are, whether we're in a large corporation or we're self-employed, I think that that's a win.
Excellent. Where would you send people, again, the individual just exploring EI? What type of resources? Where would you send them first? So you mentioned Daniel Goleman's book. Are there any other areas where people can really kind of dive into this?
Any of his books. So I'm a big advocate of Daniel Goleman's work. There are other popular books, bestsellers, that I'm not as big of an advocate for, because I think they've taken a little bit too much liberty and tried to write popular books as opposed to writing sound books. Because, like I said, I'm a believer in the science of this. Another book that I believe is very similar to this, and it has much more from a tools standpoint. So it's easier to practice emotionally intelligent behaviors, is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. It's a book that's, I don't know, been around 25 or 30 years, but very well known. And it has a lot of eerily similar principles in it to emotional intelligence. So those are the two that I would highly recommend. I'll also emphasize again that emotional intelligence is not something, in my opinion, that we can develop by watching YouTube videos and social posts. Like, this is a rigorous, lifelong practice that is similar to physical fitness. And so we all know that for us to be physically fit doesn't just involve exercising, but involves how we eat, and involves how we sleep, and everything that we do with our body is physical fitness. And that we're never as physically fit as we want it to be. Right? Those of us who are committed to it continue to work on it, because we know that it'll help extend our lifespan. That's what emotional intelligence is. It doesn't matter how emotionally intelligent we are. What matters is how emotionally intelligent we can be. And therefore, it does require, in my belief, a deep dive from a studying standpoint and also a practice standpoint.
Yeah, it's a habit, it's a practice, it's a lifelong commitment. Um, but again, I think what's amazing is this isn't just a career thing. This isn't just an output thing, right? This is a better, more fulfilling life. Like everybody has relationships, right? Outside the workplace, we have our wives, our girlfriends, our husbands, our children, boyfriends, parents, and all of those complicated relationships, right? And while you can't control everybody else, you can control and you can develop better control over how you react, respond, and believe me, that makes for better relationships. So I'm a huge believer, and I hope that we're able to kind of connect the why with, with some of the practices. Raman, where can people learn more about you and what you do?
Well, I'm on most of the social networks, and what I do is all in the Junto Institute. So it's thejuntoinstitute.com, and Junto is spelled Junto. And that's where anybody can learn what we do as well.
All right. Raman, thanks so much for being on. I really appreciate it, man. I'm getting goosebumps because I just love reconnecting with you and love our conversations every time we get the chance. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story.
My pleasure, Mike. I appreciate you asking me to do this, and spreading the word about this, because I believe that more of that needs to be done.
Great. Awesome. Thanks so much, and we will talk soon.
Sounds good.